Hi everybody, it's Sarah Cray with Let's Make Art, and we do art tutorials, and I specifically teach watercolor. And this is the watercolor project we are doing today. Birch trees. This is a monochromatic painting, which means one color is being used. That's it.
What?
What?
You're using one color for that? Oh my God.
Yeah, sorry, I gotta get a test paper to show you guys the colors. So, supplies being used. Just one color in different values. This is Payne's Gray, which is really similar to black, but it has kind of a bluish tint to it. We are using two paintbrushes, around 6 and around 2. These are our go-to brushes. They're Princeton Heritage Series, great quality brushes. We highly recommend them if you do not have them. We're using Canson watercolor paper, 140 pound, cold press. Okay. To do this project, we are going to do it in 4 steps. So our very first step is we're just going to lightly sketch our trees because this does not come with an outline. This is all freehand, but don't let that scare you. I'll walk you through it. It's going to be great. Step number 2, we are going to do the light wash of the background, which is essentially painting around the trees, very light. Our third step is putting in our trees that are in the foreground, which is the trees that are closest to us. And then our last step is we will be putting texture and like the branches on the trees, like the little twiggy branches on those. Okay. I'll leave that in frame so you guys can see it. Can they see that?
Yes, they can.
Okay, so before we get into our warm-ups, let's do our oath. So if you can raise your right hand and repeat after me. I promise to be kind to myself.
Promise to be kind to myself.
I promise not to compare my work.
Promise not to compare my work.
And I promise to have fun.
And I promise to have fun.
You guys can say it too. We have different. We have Brock and Taylor in the back with us. They're working while we're filming, so sometimes we make people say the oaths with us, even if they're not currently painting.
Brock is working. He could be kind to himself.
Yeah, you can apply this oath to your regular everyday.
Yeah.
You don't have to be painting to do this oath. Good point, Keenan.
Thank you.
Okay. So the warm-ups that we're going to do today are, we're going to focus on a few different. They do tend to repeat, so if you're used to our warm-ups, you probably already know what they might be. We're going to go over value change, we're going to go over wet on wet, and then we're going to go over just some textural brush strokes. So feel free to skip this part. If you're brand new to painting, this is a great way to understand the different things that we'll be doing during this project. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is value. Value is all about the lightness and darkness of a color. So even though this has only used one color in this project, if I can pick it up, we have lots of values. So the background here would be a really light value. And then this would probably be like a medium value, and then here you can tell that it's a darker value. And in watercolor, if you want a lighter value, all you have to do is have more water. And then if you want a darker value, you have more paint than water. So I'll show you guys how to do different values. So if you want a light value, usually I do dark to light, but I'm going to show you guys how to do light to dark since that's what we're doing in this project. I'm going to get my paintbrush wet, I'm going to hit it off the side of the cup, and I'm going to grab just a little bit of my paint. So I'm just like dipping my toe into my little paint puddle here, okay? And then you paint with that. And so here we have a light value. Now if you want a medium value, get your brush wet, hit it off the side, and then don't like full on bathe in the pool yet. You're going to go like halfway in. And there's a medium value. And for a dark value, you're going to go all the way in this baby. You are jumping straight in.
Swimming.
Like it's summer and it's super hot and you just want to jump straight into that pool.
I mean, it works if you want to do like a polar plunge challenge.
Oh, have you done that before?
Not really. I did like a bucket challenge. Don't look it up. It's on the internet.
Don't look it
It's horrible.
What if I typed in Keenan Ice Bucket Challenge? Would it pop up?
It might. I don't think so. I hope not. It's out there though.
Not last New Year's, the New Year's before, we went and jumped in the pool at midnight. But it was in California, so not nearly as serious.
It was like 60 degrees outside.
It was probably like 45, which is pretty chilly for California, but nothing for Missouri.
The
so
pools are shut down here.
Yeah.
At this point.
If you try to jump in the pool, you would die because it's like
jumping into
ice.
a skate park. Like you'd hurt yourself.
Okay, so you're picking up all of the paint, and there's your dark value. Okay, now there are a lot of values in between here. Okay, so, and you will, as you're painting, you're going to be getting different values, and that's okay. But these are like the three main ones. We have a light, we have a medium, and we have a dark. Now, one technique that we will be using is called wet on wet, which is really wonderful to watercolor, and there's a lot of room for accidental art. You can't really control it. It's one reason why I love it. So how we're going to do that is I will be creating like a tree trunk here, and then while it's still wet, so you want to make sure that the surface is wet, I'm going to drop in some wet paint. So I'm going to grab some more paint and drop in, and you see it's just going to bleed and it's just going to move. And this is where it's like an accidental element, because like I'm just touching it in. Those veiny things, it's doing that on its own. But if you have too much water, let me see if I can show you. Sometimes if you have too much water on your paper, that actually was not a good example because that was really cool and it moved everywhere. But sometimes you touch it and it will just stay there. And if your under part of it is too dry, it won't spread. You just need to re-wet the undersurface. So kind of play with this a little bit and see like how quickly you need to work to drop stuff in, or how much water you need. It does take a little bit of time, but it's really, really cool. And you can see that once you touch it, you're supposed to just leave it to get these really cool textures. Now, the last thing that we're going to go over is some rough texture. And this is not something that I don't think we've ever used this on a project before. So this is a fun new thing.
No.
Which is, usually you want to make sure that your paintbrush is nice and damp so you can have a smooth line when you're painting, like so. But when your paintbrush is dry, you can get this really cool rough texture, which I thought would be super fun to use on the birch trees, because that's actually how the bark. Yes, thank you. That's how the bark looks. So for this, I'm going to make sure my paintbrush is dry. I'm not going to put it in water. I'm just going to grab paint, and I'm just going to make these kind of dashes here. So you can see you can get some really great rough textures. Wow. And so when we get to that step, make sure your paintbrush, you're not dipping it in water first, which is like the first time we've ever done that. So yeah. Fun new things. Okay, let's get started. Excuse me, I have a cold. Can you hear me like?
I was just going to blame it on static. That was just static.
That's static. That's not me being like, I can't breathe. Okay, pencil. So you can go ahead and use a pencil to sketch, but just a word of caution, watercolor is transparent, so if you draw really hard, you're going to see the lines through it. If you have a gray watercolor pencil, that's probably the best thing to sketch with, because, or really just, well, if you do like a red watercolor pencil, if you add water to it, it will give you a red color, so that's why I say gray, especially for this project. Those lines bleed out as soon as the water hits it. So if you have that, it's really wonderful. I'm just gonna use a regular pencil.
I did a drawing recently, a paint thing where I misspelled a word, but I actually just used a regular pencil, a colored pencil, not a watercolor pencil, and it kind of left that, like the circle I drew, it didn't blend in very well, but it kind of made it pop a little more.
That's cool.
I don't know if that
So you're doing some like multimedia stuff.
I mean, well, I'm not trying to brag, but I've used pencils.
Look at Keenan here. Okay, so, and the reason why we don't have an outline for this project is because One, drawing is scary, but if you break things down into basic shapes, you guys can do it. And I feel like these birch trees, we can break them down a little bit so they're not so intimidating.
I'm excited for the twiggy parts.
The twiggy?
Yes.
So the thing about birch trees is they are like thin and long, and their branches all kind of like go, how do I say it? The thing with trees is the branches that come off of it are always going to be thinner than the trunk that it's coming from. That's the biggest thing you have to remember with trees, okay? So if I'm drawing a tree here and this is my trunk and I'm having a branch come off, it's got to be thinner, like the width has to be thinner than this, okay? If I make it bigger, that looks like a funky tree, you know what I mean?
That's goofy.
But if it's thinner, then you're like, oh yeah, that's a branch, okay. Okay, I see what's going on. Now, are there exceptions to every rule? Yes, I'm sure in nature you would probably find a tree that has a branch that is super thick, but odds are it's going to be thinner. Okay, so I'm just going to start sketching, and I taped my paper down since we're going to be wetting most of the paper, and that way it will reduce bending. I just use painter's tape. So I'm going to start off probably about like 2 inches from the bottom to start with my foreground trees. So I'm going to start with my background trees first. And I'm going to draw really light. So here's my trunk coming up, and then a branch is going to go off this way. And there it goes. And then I'm going to do the other side. And this branch comes off this way. Okay, so there's my one tree. And I'm going to do another second one over here. So if it's easier for you to do like 2 lines that get closer together over time first, and then put in your branches, that works too. Whatever is easier for you. Okay. Now I'm going to sketch my other 3 trees, 3 to 4 trees right now. If you want to wait till after the first step of when we paint it to sketch in your trees, you can do that too. I don't think there's a wrong or right way, just whatever makes you feel more comfortable. But I'm just going to do it now. So the ones in the front, the ground is going to be lower. And these trees I want to be a little bit, just a little bit bigger. So, okay, and then I got a really big one going right here. And again, these do not need to be perfect. They're all going to look different. I don't want it to look exactly like mine. It's okay if it looks different than what I'm doing right now. Okay, and then I'm going to have one kind of going wonky over here. Okay, now you can see I'm not sketching the bark. I didn't even put all of the little branches in. That's something I'm going to put at the end. But that's because I feel comfortable making those decisions as I go. If you do not feel comfortable making those decisions as you go and you would rather have it more clearly laid out, then go ahead and fully sketch out where you want those things to be. I'm okay with the little bit like, let's just see what happens kind of thing. But I understand that not everybody is that way, and that's okay. So if you need to adjust it to where you feel more comfortable, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so now we're ready to paint. I'm going to get my paintbrush wet. I'm going to grab just a little bit of paint because this is going to be a light wash. And then I'm going to start painting around the very first 2 trees that I put in. So what we're trying to do is trying to kind of like define the shape a little bit, but we're still also trying to communicate that they are far away. Now, whenever you're doing landscapes and you want to communicate space, usually the things that are farther away are smaller and are a lighter value, or at least not very contrasty. So usually things that are closer to us, because they're closer to us, we can see the lights, we can see the darks, and they're sharper, like more in focus. Like think of a camera with a picture, right? Things that are far away are blurry, and then things that are close to us are in focus. Our eye automatically does that for us, which is amazing. Our eyes are so amazing. And so we're really trying to recreate and communicate that space on a 2-dimensional surface. And that is called things that get lighter as they get farther away. Keenan, do you know that art term? We talk about it a lot.
Perspective.
Yes, you got the second word. Brock knows it.
I think I have a different word in my head and I can't think of the first one.
That's okay. Brock, do you know what it is?
Atmospheric perspective.
Oh, that's the word I had.
Atmospheric perspective. That's it.
I used to watch the tutorials.
And you used to film them. So with atmospheric perspective, what essentially that is saying is that when you're looking at a landscape and you're seeing something, even though the only thing in there is air, air still will give us a feeling of depth and space. So the atmospheric perspective.
The second word is the hardest.
It's a hard word. So atmospheric perspective is the idea that as things get farther away from us, they get lighter in value and less contrasty. Is contrasty a word?
Yes.
I mean, contrast is a word.
Contrast-y-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, if you want, you can paint, you can like go over the trees with this light value, the ones that are going to be in the foreground, or you can avoid them. What I kind of did is specifically around this one here, I didn't paint over it because I wanted that one to be very contrasty. I wanted it to have lights and dark darks. So I had to leave some of it white. But if you're doing a light enough wash, you can just paint over the whole thing and it won't matter really. We'll just do really, and let's say you accidentally grab too much paint to begin with and you're starting and you're like, oh gosh, that's a darker value. Well, don't freak out, just grab your paper towel and pat it and then take some water and then use that color to smear it to smear it out, blend it out. It's probably a more technical term.
Our dictionary says that contrasty is not a word.
Okay.
But contrast is.
Contrast. Okay, I'll just say contrast instead of contrasty.
Also says twiggy is not a word, which I'm shocked.
You're telling me twiggy isn't a word? Wasn't twiggy the name of like a model in the 70s? Or wasn't that a look where you like painted eyelashes on your
I don't know about
eyelid?
Either of those things.
It's gotta be. She was a model? Yeah, okay. Thanks, Taylor.
Oh, I'm wrong.
What?
I was kidding about twiggy, but it is an adjective.
Really?
Yes, twiggy. T-W-I-G-G-Y.
What does it say
It
is?
just says twig, a small branch, and then it says twiggy. So you can be twiggy.
Now, the fun thing about this project, which I actually find pretty interesting, is we're actually playing with negative and positive space at the same time. So our background, we're painting around our subjects, and then our foreground, we are only painting our subjects. And by that, it is creating some depth and dimension, which is just interesting, I find, in general. Probably not true to what you would see to nature, you know what I mean? Like, if we were to, like, go out, we probably wouldn't see just, like, white trees and then, you know what I'm trying to say?
I think so.
But I feel like it does the job of communicating the space, and it's kind of fun to play with those rules to see how they communicate your ideas. Okay, so we did step 1. So we kind of painted around our trees, and we're going to leave these 2 white. And then we're going to start on our foreground trees here. So these ones, I'm going to grab a wash, and I'm going to start painting them in here. And this is where I'm going to do my wet on wet, so I got to work quick. So here's my wet, and then I'm going to take some darker color and kind of like drop it in along the side. Now this isn't moving as well as it did in my warm-up, so if you want, you can be like, come on little fella, move around for me, help me out a little bit.
So while I was looking up Twiggy,
Yeah.
I remembered, and it was very obvious, that some words in this dictionary, because this was a gift from us to us, some words are highlighted, and twig is one of the ones that is highlighted.
She's like, this is the word you always forget.
Yeah, she said, please honor me by accepting this handy reference guide that I call, is that the right word? She said, or a dictionary / thesaurus. Feel free to call it Steve or whatever you wish.
Steve! I'll be like, can you refer to Steve, please?
I'm going to put a new cover name and just call it Steve.
Okay,
I
from now on.
really wish I had read this better. I didn't read the note to you very well. I'm so sorry. She
oh
goes,
my gosh.
I've taken the liberty of highlighting some words that I thought might be helpful during your tutorials, as well as some random words I found to be interesting.
Did she say her name? Did she sign the note?
Yes.
Oh, what's her name? Just her first name.
M.Y. It's tree-hugging Buddhist that follows.
Oh!
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, you're so great.
Oh, she's so
Thank you so much.
What makes me feel bad is that she wrote this in July.
You're telling me for months we had access to Steve?
Yes. Steve's been sitting on this table. I've looked at it a couple times.
We have used it, but I just am so mad we missed the nickname for him.
I do too. So good.
Okay, so as you're painting this foreground tree, the thing you want to be aware of is you just want to make sure that the values that you're using are going to be darker than the values that you put in your background. Already we're there, and if you did a really light background, that won't be too difficult. If your background was a little bit darker than you anticipated, that's fine. You just have to adjust your painting. And I think I talked about this a little bit more in the skeleton tutorial, but a lot of, while you're painting, it informs your decisions as you go. So if you kind of start off a little bit darker in your values, then that's fine. You just have to make sure that everything else is in relation to how that started. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
This is how it started. And this you have to respond to how it started. This informs this here, over here. Okay. So I'm starting to get some really cool textures going on here with just some of that wet on wet technique. And I am going to leave it and move on to the next tree and do the same thing. The rough texture and the really dark values, I'm going to wait till the end, because even though we want to use wet on wet for stuff like that, we don't want to do it for the entire time, or else our tree will probably end up just being like super dark, the whole thing. It would just all bleed together. So we want to make sure our texture lines are sharp and don't blend out. So that's why we're going to wait for that to dry. And I'll move on to my next tree. So I'm starting out a little bit darker value. I dropped my pencil here when we started, but that's okay. I'll put some bark over it. No harm, no foul. Okay, and I'm going to grab some paint and go along. Now you can see I'm kind of breaking it up a little bit so it's not perfectly like outlined the whole way, because you can always add more. Then it's much easier to add than it is to take away in watercolor. So sometimes I like to be a little bit like, we'll just do a little here and there, and I can just add more if there needs to be more. So Keenan, I was like, I'm going to be prepared this tutorial, and I'm going to look up the different parts of birch trees. So these little black things I can specifically name. And I'm going to be like, you know, I'm going to surprise everybody with my knowledge. Because usually I'm not prepared like that.
Right.
And then I was just like, parts of a birch tree, you know, Google. And it was just like the only thing I could find. It was like trunk, branches, leaves, roots.
So the regular, the usual suspects.
The usual names.
For a tree.
So basically, if there is a special name for these black marks or really dark marks that are on birch trees, I didn't find them easily. Maybe it's just the bark.
Maybe it's like a tree version of acne.
Maybe they're like, we don't talk about it,
yeah,
okay?
it's just puberty.
We don't need to bring it up in front of the birch trees.
Could be growths that they have.
I don't know. I think it's just a quality of the bark, but I don't know. I felt like there should have been a more specific name.
Been.
I tried, is essentially what I'm trying to tell you.
Sometimes I feel like birch trees are like the tree that was kind of a potato at one point. It like started to get peeled and then it grew up.
Like really long and skinny.
Yeah. I don't know.
There have been a couple tutorials where you're prepared with facts.
Yeah. Maybe I should do that more.
I don't know how many tutorials we filmed, but there have been a couple that have been ready.
It was great doing the, it's sometimes great filming with my husband, Michael, because he is just a fountain of random facts.
He's a fountain, a wealth of knowledge.
A wealth of just random knowledge. Is it accurate? I think so.
Even if it's not, he makes it sound so real.
I know, gosh. So sometimes I rely on that a little bit too much. Where I'm like, Michael will know. Okay. Okay. That's looking pretty darn cool. And this is where Wet on Wet is truly amazing, and I hope you guys can really appreciate it for what it is, which is all of these interesting veiny marks that are drying at different times and doing these hard lines. Like, we can't control that. And I know that's sometimes hard for people to like because they want to be able to control every little aspect, but it's really wonderful to be able to let go and just be like, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And it brings this element of surprise and also something that's unique. This is why I really love using this technique, because it's going to be really hard to mimic this exactly. And that is okay, because the goal of this is not to make things look exactly like to replicate something exactly. It's about how to approach something and also make it your own. So I just love how that happens. Okay, now we're going to do our last tree over here. And then for the ground, I'm just kind of like doing a medium wash that kind of like goes horizontal, like so. And I'm actually going to put a really light wash back behind here, behind the tree, so it's not such a stark light to medium right there. Okay. And don't worry, we'll go back in and put in our darkest darks because we have not done that yet. So we really only are doing our light and medium values right now. Okay. So here's for this tree. Grabbing my medium value. While it's still wet, I'm going to drop in some along the edge. Again, if it's not spreading how you want it to, you can help it out. Or you can just leave it. Maybe you do one where you just leave it and see what it does. Now, in my reference photo, I have this fourth tree that's kind of like an in-between. I guess if we had a mid-ground, that would be this tree, since it's not super detailed, but it's not white. It has that darker value. I don't have that much room on this side to put it over here, but that's okay. You can do a couple of things. I can put it over here if I really want it, or I can just leave it out. And you guys get to make those kinds of decisions all of the time. That's the fun thing about being the one that's actually creating the work, is you can be like, well, guess what? In my painting, there's not a tree there. So.
And now you're from somewhere else.
Where? I don't know. Okay. If you had to guess what that accent was, Keenan, what would you say?
Well, it was subtle, so it was sneaky. I almost didn't catch it, but I have no idea.
I don't know either.
There's way too many people that we've heard their accents lately, and I'm self-conscious about guessing now. I don't even know.
Okay.
Somewhere in Europe.
Okay, so that was step 3. Sorry. I lost my notes. Now we're going to move on to step 4. We're going to put in our textures and like our little branches here. And we're going to be doing our darkest values simultaneously. I'm going to be switching to my round 2. You don't have to if you don't want to. But what I'm going to be doing is, especially like these little branches here, I'm going to be doing those really dark and like the darkest value. Now, one little thing, since you can see that these trees overlap one another, so you want to make sure that most of your stuff is dry for this part. Because if this tree was really wet and I have a branch going into this tree, then it would lose its shape and it would just bleed out, and we would have to like wait for it to dry and repaint it and all that fun stuff. So sometimes it's easier just to make sure things are dry before you get going. These 2 trees are dry, this one's still wet, but that's okay because I'll hit that one last, so it will dry while I'm working on this stuff. So I'm going to have kind of a thin branch come out this way. So I'm just going to kind of there, and make sure you remember that it gets thinner as it goes out. That is too straight. I need to like bend it. There we go. Okay. And now I can do some darker bark. So if you want, you can just do kind of some dashes here, or if you want to do our rough texture thing, dry off your brush and grab some paint and just, oh, look at that. That's cool, right?
That is amazing. This is such a cool challenge to do this with one color.
Yeah, and the great thing about if you have a hard time struggling with values and recognizing values, then doing these kind of challenges, monochromatic paintings, taking anything that you see and challenging yourself just to use one color to make it, is a great way to train your eye on how to view values instead of how to view color. So, and I know if you're especially starting out, that's really hard to do. So something that you can do that would be easier is if you take a picture with your cell phone, just make it black and white. That will automatically change it to an all about value, and then you can paint things that way. So, because it does take a while to train your eye to see value, because our brains and our eyes, because they work so amazing, a lot of times we don't recognize it. But when we're trying to recreate something, it's super important to recognize the different values. That's how you make form out of anything. So if that's something that you find yourself struggling with over and over again, then that is a really great thing that you can do to practice that and train your eye. Okay, so, and this I just want to point out, already this tree appears to be closer to us because we put a darker value in and sharper details. These trees will come forward a little bit more as we do that. So it's really fun as you're painting to watch, you know, different things emerge, like come out at you as you're like adding those forms and those values in.
The page is moving.
Yeah, it's like it does this.
Yeah. It's coming alive.
It's coming alive. Okay, so I'm not getting my brush wet. I'm just picking up a lot of dark paint to do my rough texture. Now, the other thing to be aware of, and I just noticed it because I did it myself, is this mark, this mark, this mark, this mark, and this mark are all exactly the same. So try and switch it up. If you want to use your 6 maybe to get a bigger one to change it up, that's a good idea. Just be careful about doing the same marks over and over again, because your brain is going to automatically want to do that. Our brain likes pattern. It reads pattern easily, so then when we're recreating something, it likes to create pattern even if you don't mean it to. So you kind of have to fight that a little bit and be like, no, brain, this is going to be off on purpose. And this one wasn't super dry. That stayed wet, so I didn't get that same texture. Who cares? Things like that are going to happen. Don't let something like that really mess you up. If it bothers you a lot, you can maybe lift some up with your paper towel, so then it's not as strong. But just remember, this is just a piece of paper, and the worst thing that's going to happen is you paint another one and you throw this one away. So don't be afraid to try something new. Don't be afraid to do something other than what I'm doing. Don't be afraid to mess up. And I'm going to start doing some kind of smaller branches off of here. Okay, now moving on to my last one. Now I am staying mostly to the sides of the trunk and kind of doing it on either side, but if you want to do a couple of these textures like in the middle, that would be fine too, because it does go across the center of the truck on some of them. Trunk. Okay. Okay, I think that's it. If there's any more texture or any other details, maybe you want to put a little bit extra branches in there, feel free to. When I was looking at references of birch trees, they don't go super crazy with the amount of branches and twigs, I think, in general. So, because some trees there's like a built, and it just like goes out forever and that kind of stuff. Birch trees are a little bit more simple, so just keep that in mind. And I think, oh, one other thing I am going to do is here, see how this is white here and then jumps. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did over here, which is just kind of blend this out a little bit so it's not jumping from a completely white space to a medium value. Just kind of blending it out. But you might not need to do that for yours. Okay. And what would be really cool too is if you guys still have some bleed proof white, if you were from our November subscription box and you still have some bleed proof white left over, it would be really cool to do some white of those texture lines too for a super strong highlight. Now I tried to leave some little spaces of white on my paper. I didn't do a ton of that, I just did a little bit of that, but that would be a really cool thing to add if you have that bleed proof white. If you painted this with us, share it. I would love to see it. You can tag us on Instagram at Let's Go Make Art or hashtag Let's Make Art. If you want to start sharing your art, but you're a little bit nervous too because it's really scary posting your art, which I completely understand, we have a wonderful Facebook community that was created just for the sole purpose of you guys being able to connect and share the art that you're making in a really encouraging and supportive place. That's called Let's Make Art Watercolor. That's on Facebook. And so you can start sharing your work there. You can see how other people are approaching the same project. Don't be afraid to make this your own, to try something new. Remember, it's just a piece of paper, so it's okay to explore, it's okay to experiment, and it's okay to just have fun. That's the whole point. And if you need any of these supplies, you can find them on our website at letsmakeart.com. And I think that's all I gotta say. Bye.